Yo, welcome back to King Course World History number 2.
Yes, we're finally talking about Greeks and Romans and knights and Egyptians and battles. Yes!
Easy, big fella, and maybe lay off the pixie sticks, would you? We're not there yet. I hate to break it to you. We got a little bit more to cover before we get to the really fun, typical history stuff. But this stuff is fun too. We got to go to the beginning. That's our goal for today, the genesis of history. Hit it. So in our last video, our first video, we outlined what history is and also what perspective and worldview has to do with studying history. So if you haven't watched that yet, I suggest you check it out. But today we're finally talking about actual history and what actually happened. So what better place to start than the beginning? Now again, as I've mentioned, we're coming from the Christian perspective, so it only makes sense to start with the Bible. And in fact, the first book of the Bible means beginning. It's the book of Genesis. Understand what happened first in the world? Maybe that's where we should start. You guys know it, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And from then on are 7 days of creation. And God created the world and did so perfectly. And chief among his perfect creation was man. Made in the image of God, Adam and Eve were meant to take care of this wonderful new world that God had created. And with that, he gave them the perfect place to live, the Garden of Eden. God described his creation as good, and the Garden of Eden was certainly that. It was a perfect paradise for man and animals to live together in perfect harmony. Now we have to remember that the Bible is definitely a historical book. It's like any other piece of written history. So I take it literally. So when it talks about the Garden of Eden, I believe that that was a place that was in fact real. But many historians dismiss it because they either don't believe the Bible or they haven't seen it. Yet in Genesis chapter 2, verses 8 through 14, God describes exactly where the Garden of Eden was. According to the Bible, the Garden of Eden was located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, two rivers that are still in existence in modern-day Iraq, or in the ancient world as it was called, Mesopotamia, or the land between two rivers. Remember, we're focused on the study of humanity and its relationship with God, and unfortunately, things went wrong rather quickly for both Adam and Eve, the world's first humans. It set in motion the rest of human history, so it's very important. Genesis chapter 3 is entitled The Fall of Man, and it describes how Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from a tree that they weren't supposed to. They were tempted by the devil, who manifested himself in a snake-like form and encouraged them to eat the food because God was afraid that they would be like God if they did that. It's because of this that God ended up closing the Garden of Eden and banishing Adam and Eve and forcing them to live a life of work, of tribulation, and overall difficulty. Truly a reflection of Adam and Eve's sin that the rest of humanity would have to carry on. But God still loved his creation. And we see that time and again, and that's what we're going to unpack throughout the rest of this school year. Adam and Eve were commanded by God to be fruitful and multiply, and from then on we see the continuation of the human race. It only becomes more clear that humans are pretty darn rotten because of sin. We're concerned with one thing and one thing only, ourselves and our survival. So history is a reflection of the human desire to survive and to do so comfortably. And God got so frustrated with this that he sent an event that many of you know of, the flood. With 2 of every kind on board of the ark for 40 days and 40 nights, Noah and his family were able to survive the flood. So we see how rotten humanity is and how vengeful God can be, but also how loving and merciful he is at the same time. After the flood in Genesis chapter 9, God made a promise or a covenant to Noah that he would never again destroy the entire earth. And in many ways, the flood is a restart button for humanity, and really for the world too. The flood and the early portions of Genesis have revealed 4 different truths, or what I will call rules, for world history. Now, I can't take all the credit for this. I have to give a lot of credit to one of my professors in college at Concordia University of Wisconsin, Dr. Steele. This one's for you. Rule number 1, it's probably part of our sin, but we are inherently lazy. We don't want to work hard. We want things given to us. Rule number 2, people are jerks. Again, part of our sinful nature. We're really mean to each other and just all around rotten. Rule number 3, hungry people and thirsty people are lazy and jerks. We are at our worst as humans when we are both hungry and lazy, and we will do anything to anyone to get food and water or to make that acquisition even easier for ourselves. And finally, rule number 4, lazy jerks with food make the rules. We are in constant competition for survival. Therefore, the people that have access to the food or control of the food make the rules for the rest of us. History truly tells us the story of humans trying to survive. And naturally, things like food, water, and shelter are things that we need in order to live the best quality of life we can. So after the flood, humans are going to need to reacquire these things in order to survive. And that's where we see world history truly begin in most academic settings. Most teachers and professors from a secular worldview would start by telling you about how millions of years ago humans evolved and began to move in pursuit of food and safety. Now, to a point, that's true, except for the millions of years. They're a little off in the dates there. People do move in order to get food and therefore survive. But these secularists never understand why people move. They just say, well, they evolved and that's what they had to do. No. If we go back to the Bible, there's a very clear reason why people are moving. And the first one is what we just talked about. The flood. It's safe to say that the world is very different after the flood than it was before. That would probably explain the disappearance of the Garden of Eden. Things are going to be destroyed by the water that swallowed up the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Not to mention land was probably damaged. There's many people that believe in Pangea, that there were no continents, rather everything was one at one point. Well, the flood provides an explanation for how these pieces of land could have been broken up. After the flood, it would make sense that people had to move to find the best access to food and safety. And as Noah and his family continued to repopulate, this group of people would become bigger, and they would need space, which would cause people to move and go their separate ways. It explains those early migrations that so many historians point to. But if that's not enough for you, there's another event in the Bible that clearly shows people moving. Genesis 11 tells the story of a group of people who tried to build a tower up to heaven to reach God and show that humans were as good as God. God was so frustrated with this that he scrambled up people's languages and caused them to divert to different directions throughout the world. Known as the Tower of Babel, this was certainly a trigger for major migrations in the region known as Eurasia. It makes sense. That's how we have all these different cultures and different languages that people speak. Because God created it, and he forced people to move. So between the flood and the Tower of Babel, I think we have a very clear indication of why people started to move and how history really began. I say it all the time. History confirms the Bible, and the Bible confirms history. There's too much evidence there. Regardless, we've now stumbled upon again the fact that people need food and shelter to survive. So that's where people are going to move. But people are still fairly primitive, and they don't necessarily understand how to produce food themselves. So they're going to be very reliant on food that's already there: plants, vegetables, fruits, and animals. So because of that, early on, people are sort of following their food. We call these people nomads because they didn't really have a home. They constantly moved based on where there was food. So therefore, this lifestyle, which was very mobile and tended to change, would trigger migrations throughout the world. Nomadic life was the characterization of most families following the flood, all based on survival. Within that, we can see the 4 history rules. People are lazy, people are jerks. Hungry and thirsty people are lazy and jerks. And lazy jerks with food make the rules. It's all connected to food production. Nomadic lifestyle is probably a foreign concept to you and I. Last I checked, for dinner tonight, your mom's not going to say, hey, let's fire up the RV and go chase down some buffalo. It's not what happens. We don't have to go and kill our food or chase it down or find it. I mean, we go to the grocery store, but that's not like some noble quest for survival for the family. It's kind of a given. But imagine how that would change your life if you had to go and find your food. And being a human, you're kind of lazy. So you're going to want to try to find a way around this. So at some point, somewhere, some genius is going to have the great idea of, what if we brought the food to us? Now hold up, hear me out. All you need to do is plant some seeds, wait a while, and boom, you've got food. No more running around chasing animals you might not even find. Enter farming. Are you tired of scrounging for berries? Are you tired of chasing down antelope that are just too hard to catch and kill? Well, we've got the answer to you. Coming soon to a dank river valley near you, farming, the ability to grow your own food in your own backyard. Farming proves to be one of the biggest game changers in world history because it allows people to grow food in one place. They don't have to be nomadic anymore. They're not at the mercy of the food that they're following. And this is going to cause people to come together in order to farm, in order to be organized, in order to survive. We call that a civilization. But in order to produce food, you need water. So that's why in river valleys throughout the world, we're going to see the formation of these new civilizations. And each one of them is going to have their own unique story of success and failure. But that's a story for another day. In the meantime, I hope you realize how connected the Bible is to history and how it gives us the perfect explanation of how all this began and the journey of survival that humans are now on, which is again all connected to our sinful human nature. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.